Welcome to the Rant Live. Welcome to the Rant, everybody. Today is Thursday, February 24th, 2020. And I just want to say one thing first. I want to say thank you to all the listeners that have helped us grow. We are growing very nicely, and would like to thank everyone who, if you're a first-time listener, that's awesome. If you're a repeat listener or watcher, that's awesome as well.
I'm amazed we have either first timers or repeat. Like, it's wild to me. Anyway, I'm sorry. Continue.
Yeah. So if you're listening, when you are listening, because you wouldn't hear me saying what I'm saying right now if you weren't listening. But tell a friend. Tell at least one friend. If everybody could tell at least one friend about our podcast, that'd be great. And we like to think that we bring you some good information. You know, it's just a way for us to share the things that we talk about on CubsInsider.com that mostly that Evan shares and the writers over there share on CubsInsider.com. A way for us to, you know, kind of bring it to you guys in a different format and a way that you can listen and or watch if you choose to do that. So thank you for coming and listening to us. Unfortunately, the things that we have to talk about, feels like a broken record. We started the Rant as an original webcast back in COVID days, April of 2020. And we've been going not quite 2 years now, but we have not had any kind of normal time. I mean, I guess last season was about as normal as it got. And that was not really normal compared to the last several years, you know, where you had to sell off and all sorts of different players being traded. And it feels like we're right on the cusp of being at least having 5 years in front of us, perhaps, where we could actually have kind of a normal time. And I mean, the minor league system is looking great. That things are set up pretty well for the future of the Cubs. But unfortunately, we are stuck in this conversation of having to talk about the CBA negotiations that are at this point moving really at a snail's pace.
Yeah, and one thing I want to add to the first part is I'd be happy if you shared this podcast / video with an enemy or with a stranger, not just a friend. Literally anyone you come into contact with. I think you should just brazenly approach total strangers and let them know how awesome this is. But yeah, it's like the thing, and I repeat this over. I had a really awful joke about, instead of beating a dead horse, I said I was Medina Spirit's jockey, the dead and deposed Kentucky Derby winner. I don't know. Is it bad? Like, anyway, that was pretty awful.
Yeah, that wasn't great.
It didn't come across any better. It's probably better than I just left it written that nobody read. But I keep saying this, and it's like, it's so wild to me. All this is going on, right? They're like, hey, they're finally engaged. Like, the owners locked the players out. Literally the minute they could, and waited 43 days. For those of you who aren't very good at math, that's a day more than 6 weeks to even engage. And so now they're putting out this deadline, which is, you know, not a real deadline. It is a real deadline in that they need time to ramp up with a full preseason, right? You need like a month there. It's not real in that they're saying, we're not going to pay you for the full 162 games, which for the owners would be shooting themselves in the foot. We can talk about that in a little bit later, but I'm like, where was this urgency throughout all of December and the first half of January?
Yeah.
You waited 6 weeks to start this process, and now you're like, oh shit, we got to get this done by the end of the month. Like, the fuck were you doing at the start? Pardon my language. Like, I've dropped F-bombs on here before, but it is wild to me that they can sit there with a straight face and get people like Jim Ralph Bowden, you know, the disgraced former GM who somehow still maintains a job at the Athletic. And I don't mind it. The dude blocked me a while back for reminding him that he was no longer GM because he stole money from prospects. And this dude's carrying water, and people believe it. There's people on our Facebook, take that for what it's worth, who were like, the owners are the only ones who have made any significant movement so far. There, that's like, What are you talking about? The owners have made virtually no movement. And again, we're not in this position if the owners pick up the phone on December 3rd or 4th or 5th. It's like, well, holidays and whatever. Well, clearly there was no urgency. So don't try. They're trying to do this now and put it back on the players when, again, they had a month and a half. That this is only, their 10th meeting or whatever when they get together today, total of this entire time. Could have had 10 meetings in December. So I just, it is baffling to me. And the owners still, again, have not moved significantly on any of their positions. Whether you look at it just in and of itself, what they've started with and what they're at now versus where the players are at. It's just unconscionable. Although I do wonder, and I'll shut up, the owners are trying to kind of break the union and pit players against one another, but the players seem to have a great deal of solidarity. And I got to think some of these owners, like, if I'm Tom Ricketts, I'm sweating a little because in Oakland and Tampa, they don't give a shit how many people show up to the ballpark, especially in Tampa. Like, they don't care. If Kansas City, even if you are a club that's getting any kind of significant revenue sharing that relies more on that for your day-to-day revenue,
which is kind of like baseball welfare, essentially.
Yeah, you don't care. And actually, they wouldn't mind at all if a lot of the games got pushed back because that's just, they don't have to pay payroll then, and they're still going to get their revenue sharing. However, and while I highly dispute Ricketts' claim that 70% of the Cubs' revenue comes from game day activities, the Cubs do make a shit ton of money off of their gate and their concessions and all the, the rooftops and all the local businesses that the ownership also owns. So if I'm him, dude, I want games. I need games. Like, he can't sit there and forfeit half the season and still make the same amount of money. So, yeah. And there are other significant owners. The big markets, that's, man. So I just kind of wonder how those teams, and then you got Dick Monfort, who's just a tremendous douchebag in addition to everything else from the Rockies, is like their lead, the head of their labor committee or whatever. It's like, if that tells you how out of touch, like, if you want a reason to know, here's why the owners are out of touch. They've got this jackass leading up negotiations. Like, that is just awful. Not that you could really, it's kind of pick one douchebag out of a hat kind of a thing. But you could at least get somebody who maybe doesn't like openly hate the game and didn't just actually pay the Cardinals to take away his best player last season. You know what I mean? Like, there's definitely better people for the job.
Yeah, and you bring up a very interesting, I think, very valid point, which is, everybody's focused on kind of the points that are being discussed in the negotiations. But what a lot of people are not talking about is the dynamic behind closed doors of the owner group. You have 30 teams, and in order to pass a new CBA, you need to have 75% or higher, which would be 23 of the 30 owners need to vote in favor of the new CBA and essentially agree on all the different points. And so it only takes 8 owners, one of which I would believe would be Monfort with the Rockies, of small market teams, which Colorado is, I guess, basically now. And you got 8 owners that go against all the other owners who, from bigger market teams. And one of those definitely would be the Ricketts and the Cubs, the Yankees, the Mets. I mean, you can go down the list. But at the end of the day, I'm sure there is disagreement among the owners. And I think that that's an issue that's just not being discussed enough here, is what is probably driving a lot of discord behind closed doors that we don't see. And that's why a lot of this sometimes doesn't make a lot of sense, is when you're looking at where they are in terms of how far apart they are. So, I mean, the issue, there really is one underlying issue, I think, this time around, and that is the players want to get the younger guys paid, right? It's all about pay. It always is, but they really want to get the younger guys paid, and they don't want to repress salaries at the top end, which is what the CBT is attempting to do, the luxury tax. And so the owners are coming at hard at that luxury tax. They're actually trying to impose greater penalties, which would essentially make it, I don't, it becomes semantics where you say hard cap, soft cap, whatever. It's a cap at the end of the day. Right now, what they have in place is a cap because there's a tax. And I mean, think about it. If you're somebody who's wealthy, maybe you are, maybe you're not, but there's a reason that wealthy people go out of their way to avoid taxes. They don't want to pay taxes. And so there's all sorts of ways that wealthy people go about avoiding paying taxes. And you'll hear Warren Buffett and rich people say, we don't get taxed enough because there are ways for them to avoid taxes. And so that's always going to be the case. And so when you have a tax, what that does is it makes people not want to pay the tax. That's a cap. Okay. It may not be a hard cap. It may not be you can't go over this amount. But as we've seen throughout society for hundreds of years, people don't like paying tax. And so at the end of the day, it's about salary. And it's just, they're so far apart. I mean, when you talk about, any issue, I mean, I guess they're not far apart on the lottery. They're not that far apart, right? I don't think the lottery is that big of an issue.
There's a 1 or 2 picks. Like that's easy. Make it 5.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And it doesn't change the dynamic of baseball that much. Expanded playoffs, of course, the owners want you to believe they're in agreement on that. But for me personally, I did not like the expanded playoffs. I don't care if it's a way for a team to get in that otherwise wouldn't get in. I don't want to see a sub 500 team making the playoffs. And I think that's
it's moving to at least 12. It's moving to at least 12 unless they, short the players on the players have said they're cool with 12. Owners want 14. So it's going to expand one way or the other. It's just a matter of by how much.
Well,
they make it 13.
Maybe it does. But here's the thing is
one
that
extra in one division.
The word is out that if the owners want to try to hold the regular season ransom, that the players may not give in on any expanded playoffs.
Yeah, but it would only be for this season. It would be, they said they need to be paid for 162 games. You can play 150, just get paid for 162, and it would only be for this year. So in the future, if they get paid for 162, they still have expanded playoffs. That's what the players have said. They need to be paid for 162 in order to agree.
I don't like that.
Playoffs.
I don't like that position, to be honest with you. I think the players need to take a much harder stance on this. This is a huge benefit to the owners. And I know we talked about this last show that the players will make some more money off of it. But at the end of the day, the benefit really is largely to the ownership group. And so I just think that that's just a major point that the players need to push back on. And it doesn't seem like they're leveraging that. They're starting to leverage it. They weren't at the beginning. But I feel like they're actually starting to leverage that point a little bit more. You've got the service time manipulation, which is something that we've talked about just in terms of Chris Bryant and how that kind of played out and want the players wanting to limit the ability to do that. Then there's minimum salaries. I'm just going down the list of an article that Evan posted yesterday. Minimum salaries, arbitration eligibility, pre-arb bonus pool, and the CBT threshold penalties. Those are the two big ones.
Mm-hmm. The wild thing. So if we go back to here's what's funny, right? And I tweeted something yesterday, but it's like the owners. I'm trying to think of the way. I've always said this about, and it's not just necessarily wealthy people, but they do fall into this category all too frequently, especially those who woke up on third thinking they hit a triple, right? And that's what a lot of these guys are. They don't understand that other people are smart and know what's going on. Like they assume themselves to be the smartest people in the room because that's what they've been brought up to believe. And so they think that they like deserve their wealth or whatever because they, it's like, oh, because you were born, you deserve this. Okay, cool. Good for you. Take the silver spoon out of your mouth and then maybe you can learn a little thing or two. But they're like, oh, well, if we don't get it done by here, it won't be a full season and we're not paying you for the full thing. But they're shooting themselves in the foot because if they don't pay the players for the full season, they're not getting their expanded playoffs. So you might save a little bit on payroll early on, but you're going to lose out in a big way if that's their goal. But I don't think they understand that everybody else knows that they get paid more for the playoffs. The owners, that is, that the league makes way more revenue off playoff broadcast rights. I don't know that they truly understand how much everybody else now understands that. Like, it's just really funny because to me, the owners threatening to shorten the season, cancel games, or eliminate games and not pay players for it, I don't think they understand that that's kind of a hollow gesture on their part, because the players are like, fuck it, cool. You don't get your playoffs then. Like, no 14 teams, no 12 teams. We're sticking with what it is. And that's it if you don't expand it. And then the owner's like, well, shit. Wait, you knew about that? Like, yeah, everybody knows about it, dumbass. Like, even I know about that. Come on. And that's a little bit odd. But then the other side of it is the owners are sitting there going like, hey, okay, we'll increase the CBT threshold by a whopping 2%. We'll go up to 214 million, keep it there for 2 years. So as we've talked about, we're looking at, again, actually decreasing it for all intents and purposes, because if you only increase it by 2% over what it was, from 210 to 214 million, then you leave it the same in the second year, you've effectively decreased it, right? Because of inflation. And here's the wild part to me. They have significantly increased the penalties. So it used to be, it would tier up. You'd have two different actual tracks upon which it would tier. One, the penalties would go up year after year if you were a multiple offender, if you continued to repeat into a second and third. And the next one was by how much you went over. So, for example, under the old structure, your first year over, if you were less than $20 million over in your first year, it was a 30% penalty on the overage. And then in the second year, if you maintain that same 0 to 20, it was like 40%, 30 or 50%. If you went up to 40 to 60 million, and then it's like, and I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, so I might fudge some of this stuff, but I know then it jumped from 30 to 40 or whatever. And then if you went over 40%, there's an additional like 12.5% surcharge on that, whatever. But either way, it would scale. And now what they're saying is, no matter what, hey, from your first time, if you go over up to 20 million, it's 50% penalty. If you go up by more than 40 million, 75% penalty. If you go more than 60 million, 100% penalty. So it's going from 30, 40, 50 to 50, 75, 100. They're essentially doubling it or at least raising it by 60% or more in every one of those instances. It's insane.
But no one was going over it in the first place.
Well, a few
were staying over it, but they weren't staying over it.
Right. They wouldn't stay. But what would happen?
The Yankees, the Cubs, two prime examples.
Yeah. But now you don't even have teams that would get that high, and the cap itself doesn't raise, or the threshold, whatever you want to call it, doesn't increase by enough. So you're effectively even limiting those teams that would go over it for a couple or so years in a row that would be comfortable doing that. And the other thing in that is, if you go over, was it the second year? If you're in the second tier of it, you lose your second round pick. So there were some, penalties before, like you might drop back 10 spots. You wouldn't lose a pick. You drop back 10 spots, which for a team that's spending that much, they should be finishing. Maybe they're not winning the World Series, but they should be competitive if they're spending $220 million plus on their payroll. So you drop back 10 spots in the draft. That's not that big a deal, because at a certain point it becomes negligible, right? The talent is such that. But if you lose a second round pick, and then if you get into the upper tier, you would lose your first round pick. That's a tremendous penalty. And so that effectively removes all those teams from even going into it in the first place, because now you're talking about minimum 50%, possible draft pick losses right away, and all those other things. And then you also kind of, again, so I could see them having those penalties if they said, like, the players wanted to go to 243 million. Well, shit, yeah, man. If you put the penalties in there, nobody's at 243 million, and it would increase to like 273. To me, I'm saying, hey, man, give me the penalties all day, because we're talking about how many teams exceeded 210 million, like 3 teams this last year. Nobody's all of a sudden going to jump to like $250 million, right?
Well, again, this feels like an issue that the small market teams are probably pushing.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I mean, these numbers that are being proposed for the CBT aren't coming from the Yankees and the Cubs and the Dodgers. They're coming from the Brewers, and they're coming from the small market teams. I mentioned the Brewers just because I don't like them,
Yeah.
but they're coming from the small market teams. They're
They
coming
want
from
that
those
money.
8
They
to 9
they want teams to
teams
go
that,
over, even if it's just for a year, so they can taxes, baby. Give me redistribute that
well,
wealth.
I think what they really want is they want to hold salaries down,
Oh yeah,
and
no, they do.
they want to repress salaries. And the owners of big market teams who make a lot more money don't really care all that much. They're willing to pay it, but what they don't want to do is pay a tax that basically gets them kind of nowhere, where they have to backtrack to get out of it, which is what we've seen the last couple of years under the current CBA. And so that's the problem. And that's where you talk about some of the pundits out there that are carrying water for the owners. The problem is that you need to take into consideration where we're coming from and what has happened over the last 10 years with the past 2 CBAs and the situation that the players have found themselves in, because the luxury tax wasn't meant to be a cap, and that's not how it was sold, but that's how it's playing out. And the way that owners are manipulating service time wasn't meant to happen that way. That's not how it was sold, but that's how it's playing out. And so that's a large part of this whole issue, is that the way these things were sold to the players, you know, 10 years ago, basically, because that's still the CBA that we're under, is has not played out that way. And so that's where that's where you've got to start. And so you can't say, oh, the owners have made movements that are positive movements in the direction of what the players are asking. No, the players gave up so much, and they paid for it for the past 10 years, that they're just trying to get back to a reasonable baseline that would say, hey, listen, there's a reason that average salaries since 2015 have gone down. That's because the tools and these things that they're discussing and negotiating right now are working by far in the favor of the owners. And so that's where it's hard to sit there and watch, Jim Bowden talk about how the owners have given so much.
Yeah.
It's like, no, they haven't given anything, because these discussions right now have not had any financial impact or benefit to the players whatsoever. But what has happened over the last 10 years, what happened during the COVID shutdown and the delay getting back, that cost the players.
Yeah.
And you could say there's been biblical losses or whatever, but at the end of the day, franchise values have increased dramatically.
Right. And that's like there's somebody on our website who is like definitely pro owner, claims not to be. It said there, you go to both sides of this. And I'm like, and this person claims to own a business, and so they know how this all works. I'm like, your business that you own is not in any way, shape, or form comparable to owning a Major League Baseball team. And let's even set aside the idea of, people don't go to the hardware store to watch the employees work, right? The hardware store, Ace Hardware here, does not own a monopoly. People do not work their whole lives, and like they don't go and work at Menards and then move over to Lowe's to eventually end up at Ace. Like, that's not the way it works. Like the Ace is there, and I don't mean to call them out, but I'm just saying, like, Ace is not like the major leagues of hardware stores to where you got to work your way up to get there, right? It's not the elite 1% of people in their industry who only can work there. So there's just so little about it. But the other thing is, in most business, the person's like, well, at the end of the day, the goal is still to make more money than you pay out. And it's like, that's actually not true for Major League Baseball and for most sports in general. You are not talking about someone, at least anymore. This used to be the case back in the day where you needed that team to be profitable because that was maybe your livelihood, like Jim Irsay with the Colts before they really became the Colts and got, before Peyton Manning kind of brought them back. But no, it's not silly at all to bring up franchise value, in fact, because the owners, by and large, don't give a shit about cash flow. They may need to worry about that from time to time, but if you ask a Major League Baseball owner, if you put Truth Sermon and you sit there, or if you catch them in the lobby of a hotel at 2 a.m,
which may have happened at one point,
they will tell you that the primary goal of sports franchise ownership is the appreciation of the asset. That is the primary goal, because these people
think
have
about your
lots
home.
of other money.
Would the housing market be what it is today, or just what it is generally historically, if there wasn't appreciation of the asset. Of course not. Of course not. No one would buy a house. And it's the same thing for these multi-billion-dollar teams and these valuations that are coming back. Of course they want the valuation. Come on, these guys, this is an asset and you can borrow against that,
And you can count out the losses, and guess what you can do? You had a zero sum. Between Wrigley Field being a national landmark and between all the other ways that they can kind of mush around those numbers, boy, that bad boy is saving the Ricketts family millions upon millions in potential taxes. And so again, the goal of this, and yes, do they need to have cash to make payroll? Yeah, absolutely. Although, but
that's not an issue. That's not an issue.
It's not. It's not one of those things. It's not like players aren't getting checks and that sort of thing. Although, it may have been a matter of why they cut the payroll a little bit when they did, but it's not like they had to cut it down to 50 million, right? So they are, even in that pandemic year, the Cubs gained 5% in terms of their franchise value, because really, other than the 2 or 3 that might be in it because they love the game, this is the biggest, like more so than a car or a fancy house. If you want to talk about like the status symbol of some of these wealthy dudes, it's owning a professional sports team. That is, that's, again, if they get into a dick swinging contest with their buddies in the cigar room off of their, summer home in I don't know where, then they can be like, oh, how much is your franchise? Oh, mine. Like, they're not saying, Tom Ricketts doesn't give a shit how much money the Cubs pulled in, how much revenue they made. He cares about that franchise value. He cares about the overall net worth or net value of his investment in the ballpark, in the team, in the surrounding area.
Which has gone up from about what did he pay? About 900 million. It's worth about $4 billion.
Yeah,
that's billions.
Solid investment.
That's a good, yeah.
But you should just put that money in the stock market, right?
Oh yeah, because you would definitely earn that. So to say that valuation isn't part of this conversation is just somebody who just doesn't know how this.
And also, works. Franchise values have increased, and so here's the other thing. If you look at the percentage is pretty small. I don't know what it stands at now. It's one less that Cohen's gone, but most of the current owners were not owners of teams during the 94-95 period of labor strife, right? Because hell, at a certain point, it gets to where you're like, shit, I gotta sell this. It's worth so much. Like I'm silly not to move on this thing, and get out from under it. So maybe it's Bernie Madoff took off all
and they'll
all your
attempt
money.
to not pay taxes on that gain.
Right.
They'll do whatever they can.
Well, and speaking of which, they got hit. That sale that the Cubs, the way they facilitated the sale from Sam Zell and the Tribune Company, they got fined all kinds of money by trying to finagle that because of the way that the Tribune Company and Zell structured all that stuff and did everything. Like there were massive fines. The IRS got into them with a big wet bite out of their ass for the way that all got done because they were trying to avoid taxes.
But they were blatant about it. They came right out and said, we are doing this to avoid taxes. We're structuring this deal in a way that, where the Ricketts had to basically,
the family trust that they had to hold it into for however long.
10 years.
Yeah. That's always good. It's like, you should always publicize your attempt to get out of paying federal taxes. That's smart.
Yeah.
But no, if you look at where franchise values have increased relative to salary averages, things like that, there is a disparity there, right? There's a growing. So, and it's funny because a lot of people are like, oh, players make a lot of. Nobody's saying baseball players don't make a lot of money. Nobody's saying $600,000 is too little. Oh, you can't feed your family on that. Nobody's feeling bad for Max Scherzer, right? But the point is not. Here's where people get it messed up. Is to say, well, baseball players make a lot of money. Yeah, no shit. Nobody's saying they don't. The point isn't that baseball players don't make enough. It's that they are not earning enough relative to what the industry in general has increased. Player salaries, and let's not forget, players are the industry. Nobody is showing up just to do ballpark tours of Wrigley Field. They are showing up for that, but if there were no players and there's no team, that cottage portion of the industry kind of goes away pretty quick, right? So the point is that player salary, player payroll has not increased at the same level of league revenues and franchise values. And so when you have that disparity in those 2 areas or 3 areas, then of course the players are going to say, well, hey, we're not saying we need a bigger piece, a higher percentage than 50% of the pie or whatever. They're just saying we don't want our piece of the pie to decrease over time, which it has. We just want to bring this thing back to level, to where we're all increasing at the same time at the same rate. That's all. I mean, the owners are still going to have everything they need, but the owners are beginning an increasingly larger piece of the pie, and they don't want to give any more of that back, is really where that comes down to. And I think that's where people get it twisted, because they're thinking the players have like increased at the same pace. You know, people look at it like, I've had people literally try to argue with me. And my favorite is that ticket prices go up because these players are making so much money.
Yeah, I saw that.
And buddy, that is the dumbest. That was never true. What is the most basic? Okay, you can't agree to disagree. Nobody's saying that franchise values are liquid cash.
The thing
I
is,
literally spoke to an owner. I'm saying this very clearly. An owner of a team that you may be aware of very literally told me that this is the goal. I can't get much past that in terms of just like, it's very clear.
Some people don't have the mental capacity to deal with the reality.
Right. That's not how, like, wealth is not measured in liquid cash, right? Like,
for poorer people, it is.
Well,
and that's kind of where I'm coming out.
But like, yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Like, well, you know, it's like you mentioned, like, you think is Jeff Bezos walking around with like a giant gangster roll of hundreds that he just peels off when he goes there? Like, no, like, he's worth a shit ton of money. He doesn't carry around his liquidity, but he could make that liquid if he chose. Just like, I mean, the Ricketts family, somebody wanted to get on me. They're like, well, the Ricketts can't just do this. I was like, the TD Ameritrade sale was like the full stock. I mean, it's like they could sell off a few shares and liquefy some things if they needed to.
Today might not be a good day to do that, but
no, it probably wouldn't be. I'm not looking at my 401k or anything. But no, it's what it comes down to again is that I think people are mistaken and that they do not understand. They cast aside the very most basic. What's the most basic, most common? Everybody should understand this economic principle when it comes to cost. The most simple thing ever, right? Supply and demand. That's what drives tickets. If you weren't showing up to the ballpark, maybe they would lower the prices. Or if they weren't making a bunch of money off of it, then that's getting close because their season tickets are running a little thin there. But it's not that they're saying, oh, shit, we got to raise prices because we got to pay these players. If that was the case, A, Cubs tickets would have gone down over the last couple of years. And B, if we saw this, again, average player salaries have gone down. Average ticket prices have not gone down. I mean, that's as simple as it gets.
There's an indirect correlation.
Whoa, hot mic.
My mic's hot?
Oh, yeah, you're loud as shit.
Oh, thank you. I'll talk softer. Well, yeah. I don't know. It's a lot to get upset about when you see what's happening, and there's not a lot you can do as a fan. And I think that's the most frustrating part of this whole thing is being fans. All we can do right now is sit here and watch as these guys meet down in Florida, hope they come to some type of an agreement, debate the merit of what, the issues are, and that's it, and hope the season starts on time. But the upside is that the minor league spring training is about to start because minor league players are not unionized. They are manipulated, but not unionized. Exactly what the owners would prefer to be doing to the currently unionized players. So they are down here in Phoenix, Arizona, and they are you're starting to get some, it's kind of one of the only things to cover right now for baseball. And so you're starting to see, some pictures come out of spring training for minor league spring training down here in Mesa, Arizona at the Cubs facility at Sloan Park. So that's cool. And I might cruise down there. Weather here has been really terrible the last couple of days, and it's like super cold today. But I see it's sunny. So
they're probably not even going to do. Are they even going to do outdoor activities if it's that cool, or will they just keep it all inside?
I would think that they might. I mean, it's not that bad. I think it's the highs are probably going to be in the 40s today. So it's not, I mean, comparatively speaking, it's not all that bad, right?
They're going to have to get used to that if they're heading up to South Bend to start the season.
Yeah.
It's generally cool there. But it is what here's how you know there's no Major League Baseball is like both the Athletic and the Chicago Tribune have feature pieces on DJ Hurst, which is great. I mean, it's a great story, awesome prospect, good dude. But it's just funny that like the lead thing that I'm getting emails about from the Trib or that the Athletic's posting about is a prospect pitcher at a time when there should be Major League spring training games going on right now, right? Minor leaguers are in camp to warm up for like they've got their pre-camp going on here for a couple weeks, and I think it's March 7th. I think that minor league camp it was officially supposed to open, which would have been, it's like 3 weeks after the Major League camp, and then they start to overlap. But I just thought that was funny. I was like, so he must have been the one they threw out for media availability because there's two different stories on him from two different Chicago outlets.
Honestly, I mean, when it comes to the Cubs, it's like that's what we're going to be talking about anyways, is the minor league system. I mean, the season can start all at once too, and it's hard to imagine that the Cubs are going to be all that successful this year. Who knows? I mean, there's still a lot of free agents out there and a lot of guys that will remain unsigned as long as this lockout continues. But what's the path forward, really? I mean, listen, there's an obvious middle ground here. I think all of us can point to what that is. Ken Rosenthal wrote a piece in The Athletic this morning, just a few hours ago, about what that middle ground is. I mean, where you're talking about CBT thresholds, it's obvious. I mean, the owners are way on one side of the fence and the players are on the other side. All you have to do is meet in the middle on these things. And the real issue is, does that happen? Are both sides going to be content with meeting in the middle? Because, and truth be told, if they do meet in the middle, it's going to be a big win for the players. It just is, compared to where they're coming from.
Yeah.
But if you compare it to where they were 10 years ago, prior to when they made all these concessionary kind of agreements, which I think is what they are, I think that's what you have to compare it to. And so you have to say, where were the players 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and where are they trying to get to now? And you're still going to see that the benefit when you compare those two things, it leans on the side of the owners for sure. And so all the players are trying to do is they're not trying to get everything back. And I hate it when people say this. They're trying to get some of it back. And it looks like they're trying to get everything back when you compare it to the current CBA. But it's not fair to do that because the current CBA is really the issue. And so it's like we could see the path forward appears to be meeting in the middle. But what do you think, Evan? I mean, what do you think the real path forward here is?
Yeah, it's just looking at, kind of as you laid out there, I sort of look at it like if you've ever been, you typically see this more in basketball where you have a makeup call, right? Where ref makes a bad call and then you see one come back, like, it was blatantly, and you're like, oh shit, that was out off me. Like I knocked that one out of bounds. And then if you get called for one later, you should be like, yeah, it's makeup. We got it. I feel like the owners, and they're not because they're assholes, but like they should look at that last one and be like, holy shit, dude. We got over on them so bad that last time. Like, we can give a little bit here. Because, I mean, they absolutely. Now, I will say this, and one interesting thing that is flying under the radar, and that I think this is part of what the poison pill on the CBT is that the owners did agree to get rid of the qualifying offer system with penalties, draft pick penalties, and that sort of thing for signing, which is that's huge for players. That's tremendous because that qualifying offer deal. And I remember at the time trying to be sold as like more player friendly. Like the current QO system was supposed to have been better. I was like, I remember looking at this like, what the hell are you talking about? This is awful. This is going to crush them. And it was awful. And so that's gone. But that's where the owners are saying, well, but since there won't be these draft pick things, you won't have that compensation in there. You guys may, and then they're trying to stick in the harsher penalties on that end. I mean, to me, it's like, I think we talked about earlier, like the draft lottery thing. I mean, the owners have said they're cool with offering some compensatory picks if you have a guy up, a prospect up the whole year, and he wins certain awards, and they're doing that for 3 years. I think that, I think the players want to add. I think it's dumb as shit for them to want to add in like war based. So they finished in the top 7 war, like.
And I don't think that's going to end up happening.
Yeah, I don't think so, because you could manipulate the shit out of it too. I don't know why the players would want that, but I think that part's fairly simple. I think from the players' perspective, hey, the Super 2 was at 22%. The players have only come down at they started at 100 and have moved down to 75. I'm like, guys, can you meet at like 40? Can you be at 50? Is there a mark there?
And the owners have said that's a non-starter.
Right. They're saying at 22. And, as a result, the players keep bumping the bonus pool up. And I'm like, well, what if you get a $650,000 minimum, a $50 million pool, right? Which would be kind of in the, the owners have come up to, what are they at 20? Did they come up to, or 15? They got to 15 in the last one. I think players were at 115 or 20 and 115, whatever it was. Like get to 675, maybe 675 minimum, $50 million pool for those. Keep your 22%. But teams can offer raises on top of some of those, and it scales up, and then I think on the CBT, man, what if we bump that to 220 or 225? Like keep the penalties, not where they are, not what the owners are proposing now, but keep the old penalties and bump that floor to 220 and move it up $4 million each year over the next 5 years. I mean, that to me is kind of a win over where things had been. I don't know if that gets it done from the player's perspective, but you've added basically $100, about $75,000 off the top to the minimum salary. You've added that bonus pool in there. You've put in some measures to have them call up and keep up top prospects early. You've done a little bit to kind of curb the incessant tanking, and you've increased the CBT threshold without strengthening the penalties, and now you've removed the qualifying offer penalties as well. To me, that's a drastic improvement from where the players were over the last 5 years and even 10. And the owners aren't having to give a whole lot in those scenarios. I don't know. To me, that's a no-brainer. I think that would work, and then the players can kind of build off of that moving forward. And that's not, that's the players giving from the position that they've currently held in a lot of areas, but it's getting significant ground, I think, from where they were in the past. And that's where I think this comes down to. And then the owners are having to move significantly from the positions that they're off of right now. And I think I don't want to call it like a win-win. I think regardless, I don't think the players get back to where they probably should be had they done a better job of negotiating each of the previous 2 CBAs. But I do think they gain ground over where they've been, if that makes sense.
And that really needs to be the objective. I mean, as bittersweet as that may be, it needs to be the objective. I personally, I don't think that in terms of the CBT penalties, it matters one way or another what those penalties are, because I think that effectively, like I said, it's a tax, and you're just not going to have very many teams go over that.
As long as my only thing is they got to be bigger than 214 million, though. They've got to raise that threshold.
I agree. You've got to raise the threshold to get there.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of the penalties, they can be whatever you want them to be, because I think that's effectively a tax. So it's just the thresholds need to go up. That needs to be the main objective. Who cares what the penalties are at the end of the day? They can be whatever they want to be. You're not going to really have that many teams go over it, if any. Like you said, maybe last year there were maybe 3 teams that were over it, and they're all working to get down under it. And so that's just kind of the way it goes, is if a team does go over it, they're going over it because they think they have a chance at the World Series, like a legitimate shot, and they need to go over it. But the other part of that is that if you manage your payroll correctly, you can bring in a high salary guy at the trade deadline just for the remainder of the season and still stay under it. And so there are ways to manage the whole situation. It's not like you don't need to commit long term to players. And I'm saying this to owners, basically, to say that there is a way that they can work around the CBT thresholds. They just need to be a little bit higher. But I think the biggest thing is really the getting the lower level guys paid. And I mean, where you talk about the Super 2 guys, it's the top 22%, I think, in playing time over 2 years, between 2 and 3 years, right?
Yep.
And so there's a way that's the biggest one of the biggest issues, I think, because what the owners have figured out a way to do is that they want as many of those guys to be guys that once they hit arbitration, they can just DFA them or non-tender them. You don't give them a contract. I mean, and that happened to Kyle Schwarber. He wasn't a Super 2 guy, but it happened to Kyle Schwarber. And so that's where you come off. So if you think about how it all works, you've got these young players who are coming up. The teams want to hold on to the valuable, really good players. Those are the guys.
Right. They want that extra. They want that extra year of control.
They want that extra year of control. But the players that are marginal players, they don't really care that much about them. So when you have 22%, you can kind of manipulate that in a way and work it in a way that those 22% players are typically not going to be your highest talented, most talented players. They're going to be, because of the way that it's set up, easier guys that you can cut. And so that's really what the ownership group wants to maintain, is the ability to continue to hold on to those really exceptional players for an additional year, extract as much value out of them as they possibly can before they get to arbitration. Because if they're performing at the level that the owners expect them to perform at, once they hit arbitration, they're going to have to pay them. Mm-hmm. It's still not nearly as much.
Right. Well, and that's really the key there, is that if you limit it to that top 22%, you've limited it to, by and large, with one exception for the Cubs being Addison Russell, who's a human trash bag, and that worked out really, really poorly. But Chris Bryant was Super 2, right? So those guys are, as you mentioned, they're hitting arbitration early. And what's great about that for owners is, we're paying them a little bit more in that third year than what we would have, under the league minimum rules, but we get them for an extra year of control. Why the league doesn't want to expect? So then you start thinking, you're like, well, yeah, wouldn't it be good to have more guys with that extra year of control? But to your point, the owners don't want to pay the dudes who are in that. So now, if you say the threshold is 75%, well, now you've got an extra 53% of those early players that now, and maybe, that now hit arbitration a year earlier. Well, now I've got to pay. And remember what we talked about on here before, the bread and butter, the absolute lifeblood of Major League Baseball is the league minimum players in their first 3 years, 0 to 3, because the owners can pay them less than $1 million, well less than $1 million, and they help to subsidize those players who are making 15, 20, 30, $40 million a year, right? 60% of the league is in that minimum category, has been for the last few years. But now all of a sudden, if you've taken 50% of those players and elevated them into the arbitration pool that much earlier, now all of a sudden their value, relatively speaking, becomes, now, are they still good players? Absolutely. But now if I got to pay this guy $1.5 million instead of $600,000, well, now he costs as much as 2.5 guys would have, right? And so that's why the owners don't want to move off that, which is interesting, because that's one of my favorite parts of it. People are like, well, the owners have come so much far. No, the owners literally have some points where they're saying, this is a non-starter. If you try to change this, we will not talk about it. That is what, like, they're not budging from that. The players don't have anything like that.
And there's a reason for that.
The owners are like, this is the date. After this, we do this, and we won't give you any of these things. So that's what, because it is kind of a weird topic. So when people are seeing that, and that's why I think when people see that the players are like, well, the players are moving the opposite direction, why'd they increase the bonus pool? And the reason they increased it was because they started from saying, we want 100% of, like, basically what they were saying is they wanted arbitration to start after 2 years immediately, right? 100% of the players, which was, again, they knew wasn't going to happen, but it's a bargaining tactic, right? They moved to 80, they moved to 75. Well, when they moved to 75, they increased the bonus pool back up, because now they're saying, well, fewer players are going to be in the arbitration pool. So we have now, from what we've said, there'll be more guys who are in that year 3, not arbitration yet, year 3 of their minimum. So we want to increase that pool, because there'll be more players who have access to it at that point. And so when it looks like they move backwards, it's really, it's kind of the same thing we talk about owners. They're moving money from one column to the other is essentially what's happening there. There's not a big change, but I do think that's an area where there's going to have to be significant, because again, going from 22% to 100%, it was never going to happen. The owners won't even move off.
But if you think about that for a second and you say, all right, let's say 100% of the players become arbitration eligible after 2 years, you're going to have a lot of guys that are non-tendered in that situation.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And so what you're going to do is you're going to increase
flip around and
free agent pools. And so
those guys are being picked up on the cheap.
That could work out worse for the players.
Yeah.
If you think about it, because then suddenly you've got tons of talent on the free agent market because teams don't want to pay, these higher level salaries. And so it's interesting to kind of think about how that might play out. You would think it would work out in favor of the players. I mean, it's certainly going to work out in favor of the more talented players.
Right. Well, and
I think that's the thing.
My other thought, though, is how much more arbitration do we see if that happens? And now you've got a guy who's been at the league minimum, maybe he's making $650,000, and he's all of a sudden arbitration eligible, but he came off of a fairly rough, those dudes could get skewered in arbitration and actually maybe see decreases in their pay, right? As a result.
Well, you can't go below the minimum though, right? I mean, but you could stay at the minimum.
Well, but they could be up if they were up in their second year. Like if they gave them a raise for their second year, if it's one of them that scales up, you can in arbitration, you can decrease the salary once you get up there. So if you've gotten a raise in your second year, but then if you're Ian Happ or something, you had a rough year that second time, then they're coming to you like, oh, sorry, buddy. But yeah, I mean, I think then, and maybe not even in that first year of arbitration, but certainly in that second, in that third, if those things are happening, and that's where you get your Kyle Schwarbers, which I'm still a bad decision. And if you want to look at like whether or not he'd ever come back to the Cubs, think about how he feels about being non-tendered. I think part of the fuel that he used last year was that whole thing. But you get a lot of guys in that, and that's that middle ground. There is a tremendous difference at that level when you think about it, and it might not sound like much. Saying, well, what's $1 million? If this guy was making $600,000, that's no big deal. But it is when you're saying, do we pay this guy $1.5 million, or do we just call up another guy who we can pay the league minimum to, who will be just as good, and we'll save that extra $1 million off of this? And that's because at those low levels of it, those dudes are super, super expendable. If you can perform, great. And if you're one of those top 22%, even better, because now, in terms of value, you are just, think about the value Chris Bryant provided the Cubs as being MVP, being rookie of the year and MVP in his first 2 seasons, one on a minimum salary, and they gave him a bump, even before arbitration. He was making a whole $1 million, I think $1.05 million, right? Wasn't that what he made his second year, I think? So they paid him about $1.5 million over those 2 years to perform as well as anybody else in Major League Baseball over that period, more or less. That's tremendously valuable, right? Like that is insane value, return on investment.
Yeah, because you're talking about an MVP, which is basically the best player in the league. And typically, if you're the best player in the league and you're a free agent, you're making what, like $30 million a year?
Yeah. In that neighborhood, right? And that's part of what screwed him in terms of people's weird perceptions of that, is like, oh, he sucks. Because, if you're that good that early, there's really no way to go but down in most cases. But no, it's again, to no fault of his own. But that's where it really comes in. And that's where I think that's where the owners are coming in. But if the players are able to get that pool and get those young guys paid more, the biggest thing is the minimum salary. Again, I've said this a couple times before. The one aspect of all these negotiations, of any of this, the only aspect that guaranteed will touch every single player is the league minimum salary.
Yeah.
That's the only, because not every player will ever earn or get an award or earn a bonus. Not every player will reach free agency. Most players, like arbitration even, most players definitely don't reach free agency. A very large percentage of them never reach arbitration. So the one thing that you can do that'll impact the most players is raising the minimum. And I think if the union is very serious about that, I would say, you walk back they might have to walk back the percentages, or they will have to walk back the percentages on arbitration eligibility, and probably bring the bonus pool down a little bit, but that might help you get that minimum to $700,000, right? With a $30, $40, $50 million bonus pool, maybe go to 25% on Super 2. I don't know. Maybe you can move a couple percentage points. But I'd like to see that get done. I'd really, really like to. I mean, that and the CBT are the other stuff can get hammered out if you get those two. Those are the big ones. That's it.
Yep. I guess
But
we'll
that is a lot.
see.
That's a lot.
It's especially in a few days. The deadline's Monday, February 28th, that the owners have, staked in the ground. Doesn't seem like they made any. There was very little movement on Monday and Tuesday, but based on what I saw, it didn't seem like anything got resolved at all or moved in any way, shape, or form yesterday. So I don't. It really. It's like, why are they even meeting? Because when you see where the movement that has been made, which is really none, they're still not even close. It's like, it's just, and you see, I mean, there's tweets right now from the press that's down in Florida, and it's just, the players are there and they're getting out of their car. I'm like, I just, it'd be interesting to be a fly on the wall to hear, like, to be in that building. Are they really even talking when they're in the building, or are they just kind of there? And how long do they actually
passing
spend
a note under the
meeting
door?
face-to-face?
Like,
yeah.
You like this?
How
You like this proposal? Check yes or no. And they talk about it for a while, and
yeah. So
like,
it
how
feels
about
like
75% of eligibility? Nope, 22. How about 75% in the smaller bonus? Nope, 22. How about this? Nope, 22. Like, it's just, what are they doing? I don't know.
And so this has a feeling of something that could end tomorrow. Well, actually, based on what's happened this week, it doesn't feel like it could end tomorrow. But when you look at how far apart they are, and if they could meet in the middle, which the middle is pretty obvious, as Ken Rosenthal points out in his article, you're like, all right, this could easily be resolved if they just kind of do these things, right? But
you think they're just scared of Max Scherzer, and they're looking at his different colored eyes, and it's just, they're too afraid to.
They don't want to meet with him. They're like, you stay in the other room.
Yeah, you go in the other room. You're freaking me out, man.
But it also has a feeling of something that if both sides, continue to stay kind of firm in their positions, this could last well into the summer.
Yeah. I mean, here's the issue is, again, setting aside the idea that Major League Baseball putting a deadline on this at this point in time, after all the time they wasted, is laughable. But if you put that line, it's not even in the sand, you're drawing it in the concrete and then letting the cement cure to where it's a hard line. Once you've stepped past that, now what? You're past the point of no return. Then it's like, who gives a shit? Because if the players are like, you're not going to pay us the full season now, you said you're not, and we've said we're not giving you the playoffs unless you pay us for the full season. Well, now we're done.
And that's kind of my point there is that, so they've tried to create this appearance that they're both committed to, kind of meeting at the table face to face, several months after the lockout began for the first time. They're like, hey, we're going to meet face to face every single day. Something they should have been doing in December, by the way, but they're doing it now here in February. And so you're like, all right, well, you're finally doing it, but at least you're headed in the right direction. But now there's this deadline. And so it feels like if they're meeting face to face for the first time, something that appears to be a concession for both sides, the fact that they're doing that and they have this hard deadline, if you're right, if they get to the deadline, then what happens? Do they both go home? Do they not talk for another month? Do they continue to meet face to face? It doesn't feel like that's what's going to happen. It doesn't feel like if they get to the Monday deadline, it feels like they're going to go home.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Cause at that point you gotta circle it back. If you've already said that's the deadline. And one thing I want to address, cause it's in there, Scott Boras is not going to try to get Chris Bryant something comparable to Bryce Harper. There's no way. Chris Bryant is older than Bryce Harper currently, which means he's like 3 years older than Harper was when he signed with the Phillies. So he's not getting 13 years. He's not getting $300 million. He knows that. Boras knows that. It's not. Yeah. They're not comparable.
Well, and Bryce Harper just won the MVP.
Right. And so, yeah. So, and
Chris Bryant won that.
Has had some injured. has had some injuries lately that have cut some things short. Like he's no, that's not happening.
Yeah.
That's not what Boris expects. That's not what Brian expects. I just want to tell people that because there have been some KB things that are in there, and he's definitely not coming back to the Cubs. So there's no way they're gonna work that out. So anyway, just figured I'd address that there at the end.
Boy, but it sure would be nice to have to worry about that, wouldn't it?
It would be nice.
So we'll see what happens. I mean, we'll circle back next week to talk about kind of what ends up happening over these next few days. Obviously, neither of us have a lot of faith in this getting resolved anytime soon. But at least next week, we'll have an idea of kind of where they ended things, assuming that they don't get to an agreement by Monday, and then kind of what the future looks like. And we can talk about that. But yeah, hopefully there's baseball in 2022 at least.
There better be. Oh man, that would be
not a good time to have a baseball blog when you don't have baseball.
Yeah, it's not a good time. No, that is for sure.
But we'll keep coming back. So just to keep.
It'll be the same damn show every week at that point.
Hey, guess what? We're still talking about the same issues, but they've moved $5 million. They've moved 1% of the way there. So we'll see. Everybody, it's Thursday. The cool thing is that tomorrow's Friday. The weekend's upon us. Have a great weekend, everybody. And we look forward to seeing you next week.
See you, everybody.